Hey guys, Zomfox here. Today it's time for my 2025 UFL Week 8 review. This week was another really good week of games. We pretty much had, at this point in the season, what I would argue are the two best games of the entire season. Another game which wasn't as good as those two, but was still a really great game. And another game that was good in the first half and then kind of went off the rails in the second half. It was a wild week. So without further ado, let's get started with the tank bowl between the Showboats and the Brahmas. Now, I will have a tank bowl video of this come out either tomorrow or Thursday, so of course I'm not going to go too much into this one. Overall, this was a fun game. This was a great game. This was the best Friday Night Football game of the season. The Showboats made it to overtime for a second time this season, and they won it for a second time. So yes, there's only been 2 UFL overtimes in history, and both times the Showboats were in it and won it. T-Will played a horrid game through the air, 5-11 for 36 yards, but they won. They were able to do enough, mainly on the ground through Jalen Jackson and Generic Prince, doing enough, same with T-Will, and Kevin Hogan made a bunch of terrible turnovers. Like, one of those interceptions was literally him at about the 5-yard line, throwing it 2 yards in front of him directly to a Showboats D lineman who just intercepted it. I mean, the best throw of the day by either team was done by a tight end, so rough game quarterback-wise, which is why it's such a fun game. Jashawn Corbin had an incredible game. This was a really, really fun game to watch. Yes, was it for the wrong reasons? Absolutely. But this was an incredible watch, great game, very, very fun game. Probably the best Friday Night Football game of the season. I would say this is definitely an S-tier Friday Night Football game. Now, Stallions Battlehawks. This was game of the year again. Look, we've got 2 more weeks of regular season football and then 2 weeks of playoffs. At the moment, for the second consecutive year, it looks like the Stallions Battlehawks is going to be game of the year. By far the best game this weekend. Well, not even by far, just by a little bit over the Showboats Brahmas. This is a great game. Jamar Smith versus Max Duggan was a very intriguing matchup. What it ended up being was one team having a more consistent passing attack through the deep shot versus one that had a more consistent ground game. Both teams were able to do things. Biggest difference, Jacob Sailors, 116 yards. Max Duggan, 54 yards. Versus the triple threat of Jamar, Maribel, and Person, who none of them even had 50 yards in the ground. Jamar Smith, very inaccurate, but was able to make a lot of great deep throws, mainly to Deion Kane, got 3 touchdowns. Max Duggan, still definitely not a great passer, but his ground ability is incredible. This game was a literal 1-point game. The Stallions had a chance to win it, but of course Maribel ended up fumbling the last play of the game for the Stallions. The Stallions had almost 100 total yards more than St. Louis. Both teams are pretty inept in third down percentage, but again, like the running games we talked about in the past, red zone efficiency. One team was 3 of 3, one was 0 of 2. The team that won went 3 of 3. So, congrats to the Battlehawks for winning this one. We saw Hot Rod miss his first kick, though, because it was too short. Incredible battle, awesome game. Now, Panthers Roughnecks. Weird one to look at the stats, right? Because the stats make you think that Houston dominated this game. If you just looked at these stats minus the turnovers, you're like, man, Houston won this game. They got sacks. They had 200 more yards of offense. Third down percentage, they were 50 compared to a little under 50 at 40%. 50% on fourth downs. But then they also missed 2 fourth down attempts, and they had 2 turnovers. Of course, the interception was a pick 6, which really hurt. That was essentially the backbreaker. Jalen McClendon ended up joining Perez at having a 300-yard passing game. And yes, he threw the ball 50 times, which is insane. He still had a solid game overall. Like, McClendon hasn't been as efficient and great as he was the first couple weeks he started, but this was a solid bounce back from last week. It's just that pick 6 really hurt. It was a pretty easy pick 6 to see, and it was a rough one. Minus the pick 6, he had a very solid game. Zaquandre White had another big rush, but again, just like last week, minus the big rush, not much else in the day. Danny Etling, very efficient. He had a great game. He actually made Mike Nolan look really smart for not playing Perkins to get him healthy and giving Etling some time. 14 of 22 for 167 and 3 TDs, 0 interceptions. Very solid stat line. Toa, one of his weakest games with the Panthers, and it still wasn't even as bad as, again, like a lot of other running backs. But overall, his weakest game, though, a lot of that is not having Perkins. I've said it before, Perkins is a huge reason why Toa has been as good as he is. Now, it's not to discredit Toa, but I've talked to some people on comments, DMs, and all that, who have said that Tao was the biggest reason for the Panthers' success. Not fully true. When you have a quarterback that's a true dual threat like Bryce Perkins, it adds dimensions to an offense, not just a dimension. So when you have Perkins that is a legit threat to run the football, it inherently helps a guy like Toa, because now you have the Thunder and Lightning combo, which you didn't have without Danny Etling, right? We didn't see him, didn't see Colburn, so we'll see how it goes next week, but overall, this was a close game in the first half. The pick six virtually just killed any momentum for Houston, and that last 6 points they scored was literally at the very end of the game, so it was a total blowout in the second half. Now, the last game was Arlington, D.C. So slightly overrated. This was a great game, but I've seen some people act like this was game of the week. It wasn't. This was the third best game of the week. Again, normally saying it's the third best game of the week is saying it was okay to a little bit poor. This time, that's saying it was a really, really good game. It just wasn't as great as I've seen a lot of people make it out to be. Now, you had the Chris Rollins TD pass to Jordan Ta'amu, absolutely wild. Ta'amu basically stamped MVP for him. Not really because he was incredible in this game. He was solid. He was a lot better than he was the first few games and not as good as he was last week. Mainly just because Perkins didn't play and the Panthers ended up winning. Like, the Panthers ended up losing. Perkins would be guaranteed MVP, but because they dominated Houston, he ain't going to win it. Perez, a lot of yardage again for nothing. His fake spike cost the team the game. Stoops fully threw him under the bus at the end of the game at the press conference and all that. Perez decided to call a fake spike for literally no reason. Like, there was legit no reason to do it. It only could end badly, and guess what? He threw an interception, was lost the team the game. Rough. And the ground game for DC, once again, just wasn't all that great. Again, Deion Jackson had the incredible 57-yard touchdown run. But again, eliminate that, he really wasn't all that great, right? This game pretty much showed the biggest flaws of DC once again, and that's their weak ground game and their really poor defense. The fact they let Luis Perez just dominate them again, really rough, especially when you look at how Perez has played the rest of the season, which, again, hasn't been horrid, but compared to what he's done against DC, yikes. Again, DC really shouldn't have allowed Arlington to be in this game as much as they were, yet they did. Again, I've said it before, DC, I knew exactly what would happen. You know, RJ Young, everybody's like least favorite UFL person or up there with a certain other person, had a horrible power rankings where he put DC at number 1, which, I mean, let's call it like it is. There's no argument for DC at number 1, but DC, I knew would be a bit overrated after this week because of this win, and that's what's happened. I think everybody kind of forgets that Arlington was viewed as a bottom 50% team versus Birmingham, who was a top 50% team. So St. Louis's win was far more impressive than DC's win, but it is what it is. Now, as for attendance, it was a mixed bag again. Back to being mixed. You had 2 numbers that were pretty solid and 2 numbers that were not so solid. Now, the St. Louis number, again, 30K, again. Love to see that. A bounce back from the 26,000 number. Again, we knew the 26,000 number was an anomaly because of the fact that you had not only a Cardinals game, but more importantly, at a home St. Louis Blues playoff game. So, we're back to 30K. Again, technically the third best number of the season for him, though it only beats out the week 3 number by 100. Now, the DC number, best crowd of the season. In terms of in-person, clearly the best crowd of the season and was legit the best crowd of the season. Week 10 is their last home game because they can't host a playoff game. Expect that one to be a really good crowd, especially since it is against St. Louis. And even though the 1 seed isn't for the home team, it obviously still has its impact to the coin toss and all that. So they might still be playing for trying to get the 1 seed there. Houston, man. Yikes. I'll talk about it again in an off-season video. I'll talk about Houston and Memphis, but man, this is really bad for Houston. The fact that Houston is now clearly taking the reins as the worst attended market in the league is really sad. Especially when you consider the fact that Memphis is a worse team in terms of win-loss record-wise. The fact that Houston is continuously going down is bad. They went from 7K, which is already a disappointing number for them, to 66. Huge disappointment. They drop off to 41, then 4K. And look, this isn't even accounting for the fact that this is almost as bad as the championship game when it comes to tickets distributed versus the actual in-person attendance. Just the distributed number is horrific. Again, Houston, I understand it's a big TV media market. I know I'll talk about it in the offseason. Really awful game for Houston. And then we have San Antonio. It's hard to judge San Antonio because on one hand, yes, as I talked about, the San Antonio number for the 14K average last year, that's not the average. The average was like 11 to 10-ish. That was heavily boosted because of how they do it. They averaged the championship game. Point is, this is a sad number to see, but at the same time, it's a great number to see. The fact that this team is still getting over 9K, despite how bad they are the worst team in the league. And the fact they got that much for a tank bowl on Friday night, hey, props to them, right? This is a technical poor number, as I've said. A bad number is not set in stone under, let's say, 8K. Now, under 5K, yes, that is a bad number no matter what. a bad number is relative to what you're expected and historically have done, right? It's why the single best number of the season is not the 32K for St. Louis. The best number in the season was the 11-6 Michigan had. Because even I, a guy who said Michigan's attendance would improve, didn't expect an 11-6 this season, right? DC's 14K, really solid number. It's why Arlington is probably the fourth best team when it comes to attendance this season, or fifth. Obviously, again, San Antonio probably has that beat, so they'd probably be fifth because we didn't really expect them to be that high, right? Overall, Houston, man, it's rough. It's really bad. San Antonio, okay. St. Louis and DC, really solid numbers. Mainly DC. DC's was the best number overall this week when you consider the fact that they hadn't been above 13K at all this season, and they hit almost, they literally hit over 14.5, so really good. TV ratings. Mixed bag again. You had an incredible ABC number of 973,000. Again, ABC is the best network for the league by far. The fact is, that game, if they didn't take off the last few minutes and put it on ESPN2 because of the whole NBA countdown situation, it would have averaged over 1 million. It's important to note that the peak of this game wasn't even when countdown was on. The peak was, granted, it was close to heading into it, but this game was insanely close, and the peak was a really high number. It was like 1.3 million peak, so really big. Birmingham, St. Louis, that game had the peak again near the end of it, but overall, the peak was the Memphis San Antonio that had a pretty good peak near the end of the game. The split broadcast game, man, that was rough. Now, of course, it says Michigan-Memphis. That was a typo by Mike Mitchell. That was obviously Michigan-Houston. Again, talk about it in the offseason. Houston, the whole point is the media market. Houston had the Houston game, yet the TV rating was still really poor for that game. Most of the country got Birmingham-St. Louis. Basically, the Michigan area and Texas got Michigan-Houston. Everywhere else got Birmingham-St. Louis. Really disappointing number. Its competition was the WNBA. And I know the WNBA had its biggest ratings ever, but again, as I said before, the real excuses are the Masters. That's a real excuse. Any day, you're not competing that great against it. March Madness, if you're going head-to-head against game, it's going to struggle. Those are the two really big ones. The NFL draft is another big one. Those are the three biggest ones. WrestleMania is a second tier because it is on a streaming network. Playoff games on NBA and NHL are second tier. Not all football fans watch those two leagues. But those other three that I said are the real excuses. So WNBA opening weekend is not a real tier 1 excuse. Really poor number. Memphis, San Antonio, honestly, it's kind of what we expected. If anything, it's actually better than we thought. Again, this was a game that had absolutely no meaning. This wasn't even the winner gets the number 1 overall pick. This is a game that means nothing, yet it still did somewhat solid. So, got to give a lot of credit to that number. And so that's the TV ratings. You had one number that was okay, one that was really disappointing, and one that was really good. Again, I'll talk about it when I do my off-season videos regarding the attendance, TV ratings, certain teams, and all that. ABC, man, they've been the best network. They had their two somewhat hiccup games in week 2 and 3. Since then, it's basically averaged, when you round it, about 1 million. Basically 9.5 to 1 million is what they're averaging, minus the first 2 games, which is almost what they did last year. Again, last year they averaged 1 million, basically. So they're pretty much the same. Now, Fox, I know some of their late season games also were pretty lower on the ratings, but as a season, hasn't been great. Again, the best number of the season was the FS1 number, doing as well as it did, but it is what it is. Overall, this has been Zom Fox. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Again, I still got a bunch of videos coming out this week. I got 6 more videos coming out. Tank Bowl vid, week review vid, of course, coming out Players of the Week short, and the eliminated, or the missed the playoff / playoff bound for a bunch of teams. So be looking for all of that. Stream on Friday night and a stream in the weekend. And as always, guys, think about becoming a community member for 99 cents a month, and have a great night.